Well, I'm excited for the conversation I'm going to have today. I got Dennis Melnichuk here with us, friend of the house. He's been someone who's gone through our ministry school. He traveled as an intern with my dad, and he was recently included in a Mike Winger video related to Shawn Bolz because he received a false prophetic word that was very public at the call, and we'll get more into those stories and the details of all that and sort of what transpired after that related to where he's a full-time missionary now. But before I begin, I do want to say that we recognize that not everyone who is going to watch this video is going to have the same story as Dennis, meaning the same result, that I'm experiencing it in real time with our staff and our students and those that have been near and dear to us, that there is a shaking going on and there is a lack of trust and a disillusionment that I totally understand. It's not illogical. It's actually it makes sense given the things that are coming out. And so I don't want what I believe to be Dennis has to share here, which I've heard, and I feel so encouraged by it. It is really, really an amazing testimony and story, not without its hardships, not without its real soul-searching questions that I think are important to be asking right now specifically. But I don't want that to be anyone would hear that this is sort of us trying to shape and share or stop people from being able to share their real, hey, this didn't pan out for me like maybe Dennis is, that there's still real harm associated with this. We recognize that for sure. Anytime we make a contribution, we've dedicated ourselves to we want it to be as edifying to the body, to build it up, to help encourage it, to help teach it where it needs to be taught, to help just provide comfort. And so that's what our attempt is here, to have this conversation, because in the video with Mike Winger, Dennis was specifically called out, and he offered graciously to pay for counseling for Dennis. And so I'm like, oh man, Dennis, how are you doing? I reached out, and I just happened to be going in Orlando. He lives 11 months out of the year in Ukraine, and he just happened to be in Orlando the same weekend I was in Orlando, near the same place. And so I was like, let's get together and talk. We had a great conversation, and I said, bro, there's just so much good stuff here. Let's come back and have another conversation, and if it warrants recording, let's record it. So that's our intent here. Don't hear just his story as us saying this is the way it always ends. I recognize so acutely right now that this hasn't been the final destination for many people who were harmed by Shawn Bolz and by other fake prophetic words. But I do hear in Dennis's story a roadmap for how to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus and how to stand on that rock with him, which I think can be helpful for many of us that are swirling right now in these sort of turbulent ocean waters. And so I feel like it is timely, but I wanted to just get out in front of that first and say we know that this isn't everyone's story, and we want to be as sensitive. And so listen to it with gracious ears, because our hearts really are for people to be healed, to be whole, and to be made more and more like Jesus and more in love with Jesus. So with that as an introduction, Dennis.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Tell me your story, because many people probably don't know who, what, why. Just jump in, and if I need to, I'll interject and ask for clarifying questions, but really I just want to give you an opportunity just to share.
So when I clarified that notorious moment where Shawn prophesied to me, it was not the call, it was the send.
The send, my
2019.
bad. Thank you.
I was in Orlando, Florida, and I was in China during that time. I was doing missions in Asia, and I had served about 2 years in that area. I had heard about the send, and really just hit my heart when I heard what the vision was behind it. I'd sensed that the Lord was even telling me to go there. So I scraped up whatever money I had. I talked with my leadership there, and I ended up going. And so when I arrive at the event, there's a lot of people over there, and I'll just share some details in hindsight, things that are related, just so people can kind of really get the gist of how everything kind of played out. So when I got there, I took a photo, did hashtag the send, shared how I'm excited to be there. And then people are in and out of the event, and I came was there for the most part. I was asking God for a missions movement. I was really passionate about that. I really felt the Lord was calling me into that. I've done short-term trips in different parts of the world, and near the end of the service, when everything was being closed up, I saw the leadership come up, and Shawn Bolz came up to the stage, and I was really excited. I was wondering what was going to come from it, I was hoping that God would give me a word. I had even prayed and asked God to give me a word. And
How many people are there, do you think?
there's about 60,000 people.
60?
Yeah.
60?
Yeah, yeah. I think there was even more in registration, but less came. So I think overall, if you look at any of the videos, I mean, the whole stadium was practically full. And so Shawn comes up, and I'm, as everyone else, is eager to have a word, and he calls out my name, and I was shocked. I didn't know what to do with that, and I had people, that friends of mine that were there with me, but so I thought maybe it's my friend Dennis, who's also with me, also for Washington State, but he began to specify, and I just realized, okay, no one else is raising their hand, so I did, and that moment went viral.
So he was doing it like where it's sort of like dripping different kinds of things and saying, hey, does this mean anything to anybody? Plus this. And so it was coming down to like, oh, it's me.
Yeah, well, he said, there's a person here, your name is Dennis, your parents are from Ukraine, and you moved to America, so it just gets more refined, and you moved to Washington State or DC. And I was, just, it gets very specific. And I thought, well, there could be another person. No one raises their hands. I'm hesitant. And so then the camera goes on me, and then that's when he finds me, and he begins to speak over myself, and begins to touch on things in my life, kind of progressively, speaking about the difficulties that I had through my teenage years, and then talks about the divorce that my parents went through, and then he switches and begins to prophesy. And then he's, talks about God giving me divorce. Giving authority over divorce and broken families, and begin to talk about adoption and foster care. And then he begins to talk about Ukraine. And at that time, I was still in Asia. So I had actually spoken with my leaders before coming to the Send about doing trips to Ukraine. I wanted to get my summers off. So this is before the Send, before all of this. I was, had served 2 years full-time in Asia, and now I'm beginning to have a desire to do things in Eastern Europe, but I didn't want to leave Asia because I thought I was going to be there for a longer period of time. And I had already been there, like I said, 2 years. And so I was thinking maybe another 4 years I'll be there, maybe just another even 3 years. And so I had a conversation with my leaders back home. And then before Shawn went on the stage, I actually had meetings with several missionaries and pastors who are doing work in Eastern Europe. And so when he gave me that word, begin to speak, I just connected all the dots, and I was like, wow, it was so spot on in many ways. So after going back to Asia, I began to ask the Lord what to do. I went on a long fast. It's the longest fast I've been on, and I was asking God what I should do with all of this. And at the end, I really felt peace and confidence that I need to move, right? So I had prayed it through. Then I went to my leaders. I talked to my board of directors. Interestingly enough, again, before the Send, I had spoken with my board of directors, and I told them, I feel an inclination to do things in Eastern Europe, but I don't want to leave China. I don't want to leave this place until I get a real solid word, because I had a real solid word, a real encounter with God, that it was very clear to me to go to Asia. And so I was like, unless something really clear happens that exceeds what I formerly had, I don't want to move. And just 2 months later, there I am at the Send. And so after having gone through this time of prayer, fasting, and I spoke with leaders, I processed this thing. I talked with other people, and there was this kind of consensus that if you feel that you should move, you should do it. And so I packed everything up that I had, and I headed over. I lost a lot of my things along the way. The airports wouldn't let me take a few things, and so I came to Kiev just with my 2 suitcases, a backpack, and I didn't really know where I was going to go. I just really believed that God was calling me this way, and I was really excited. So I eventually went to a local YWAM base and was starting to map out what my life would look like from here on out. And I was very committed to that. And within a short amount of time, I had Fire and Fragrance from YWAM messaged me from Kona, and they asked me if I would take a team. So absolutely, I was very excited that I had the opportunity to do that with another renowned ministry in Ukraine, and they were willing to do that in partnership.
So would you receive a team? Like they're going to send a team to you?
Right, for a 2-month period. And I didn't have anything. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a place to accommodate them. But I leaped at the opportunity and said, yes, I'll take a team. And the Lord really, I started praying, asking God for resources. This team's coming in several months. I need to be able to host them. And as I'm praying, the time is coming up closer to their arrival, and just I look at my bank account, I see this huge sum of money that just came in. I've never seen anything like it, and came from a person I didn't know personally. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, wow, this is great. And then within a couple weeks, the same amount comes in from a completely different person. And I was shaken. Lord, okay, I'm buying a car. So I flew to another country. So there's a little bit, just some of my story here. I flew to another country. This team is coming in just a few weeks. I buy a car, and I sit behind the wheel, and it's a stick shift, and I don't know how to drive stick shift. And I'm thinking, okay, now I got to call somebody and ask them how to do it. I have a team coming, so I put a phone. I called a pastor friend back in Kiev, and asked him, "Will you teach me how to drive a stick shift right now? Because I'm sitting in a parking lot in Lithuania. I got to get to Ukraine." And he starts showing me how to do this, and I'm stalling out every 10 yards, and I'm just trying to get off the parking lot. And eventually, I get to Ukraine. By the time I get there, I get the hang of it. And eventually the team comes. We were able to find accommodations for everybody, and we start traveling all over the country. And this happened already just about a few months after the team comes in. Actually, just around that period of time, COVID hits. And so one of the things that I really wrestled with is that, if I hadn't left China the time that I did, I would have been there in the midst of COVID. And the team that I was with at that time, within a period of time after this whole pandemic, they had to leave. And there was a lot of pressure from governments and so on. And so
From China, I mean the previous. Yeah.
Yeah. So they had to leave the country, and I always looked at it as the grace of God. That's how I received it at that time. That wow, COVID, everyone is shut down. Ukraine was far more lenient than most of the countries, and so we were able to just travel and preach and minister. I mean, we would, with face masks on, we were in the front lines of the war that started in 2014 in the Donbass region, and there was a woman that was running to the bomb shelter when the war first started. She fell down, and her right leg was, I believe, paralyzed. She couldn't bend it. And we began to pray for her, and she just began to bend her knees and things like that. We saw people who had severe pain in their bodies and deafness and all this kind of stuff just getting healed. So it was an incredible work that God was doing there in that time. And so I just saw the grace of God working in just this last period of history. I said, wow, thank you, Lord, for taking me out in the midst, right before all this chaos, so that I could open up a residency in Ukraine and be able to stay there through that time. I also met my wife. I met my wife early on. I came to a meeting. It was in a government setting. There was a big reform happening, targeting youth throughout the whole nation. It was a national project, and they were also trying to bring legislative reform that was affecting kids in foster care and kids in the orphanage system. And I met a young lady there, but I had met her before. I had thought she was already married. So when I saw her there at that meeting, I found out she actually did not get married, and so we started dating shortly after, and then we married. So the Lord really I just saw His hand in so many of these things. And now, looking back, also this is 2022. The war began, and everything shifted in one moment. We had invested so much of our time to build a team. We wanted to launch like a missions or ministry base. We wanted to start a prayer room. We had a group of people that we started working together to coordinate trips. And it was very difficult to find that close-knit group of people. And we were starting to have that happening, and then the war begins, and it was just chaos. We switched immediately to crisis response because the areas that we had been ministering to prior to the beginning of the war, the full-scale invasion, they had those churches were near the front lines, and so we started reaching out to pastors in the area. We started mobilizing efforts. We had a huge car van, like 22 vans, or different. I don't remember the exact number, but a big number, like anywhere from 17 to 22 vans, because they were always transitioning out. A big team of people, just nonstop, getting people out. I remember us going to cities like Kramatorsk and Bakhmut. Bakhmut in particular is just a leveled out city. I mean, it's just practically wiped off the face of the map, and we were heading those regions. I remember when at a certain point it was like a ghost town. people had panicked and left because the invading army was approaching, and we found out that there's a lot of elderly people who were left in hospice, and they were left in homes that had no elevators. So we put out a hotline and told people to reach out to us if they knew anybody, if there was anybody. And so we started getting phone calls. We'd come up to those particular locations. We would come upstairs, pull grandmas out with wheelchairs. We drilled out the seats in the back of cars, put mattresses down on the ground, laid people down on just these mattresses, and just drove out west. We had no idea where we're going, no clue. It was this heightened point of crisis, and we're just driving and calling every single nursing home and hospice that we could find to see who can take them. And eventually we found a place. But this is just kind of characterizes those early parts of the war. And eventually, at a certain point, when the peak kind of went down from this constant adrenaline rush, I had time. I looked at my Facebook and I saw a reminder of the send. And I looked at the dates, and I double checked this, and I saw that Shawn had prophesied to me in February 23rd around 9:15 p.m. And I looked at it and I realized, well, the war started February 24th, 2022, around 5:15 or so. Different cities had missile hits at different times. At Kiev, I believe, it was around 5:15. And again, this is all before all this revelation just came out about his moral failings and so on. So I had connected those dots, and I realized it's 3 years to the very dot, like almost to the minute, to the hour. So he prophesied about Ukraine, and there the war starts, and 3 years right after. And so it was an encouragement to me at that point, saying that God was not surprised. He knew all this, and it was an encouragement for us not to give up in our ministry, so that we can just continue serving and be faithful, knowing that God's going to do something out of it. So that speaks into the turmoil that I felt and had to navigate through when I found out that this is all a sham. And so I went through a really difficult period just trying to figure out, what do I do with all of this? Because Mike Winier had put out some videos about Shawn, and there was people who had messaged me a while back, even 2019, that were thinking that he was pulling information off the internet. And I had responded to a few people. I tried not to engage in any kind of online dialogue, and just wanted to stay focused on keep kind of in my lane. I didn't want to speculate on things, and at that point. And so when the first thing that when Winier put out the video, that first kind of those first videos, I took note. I just didn't know what stood behind it, where the evidence lies,
how credible it was.
Right. So I just kind of left it as it is and waited. And until the other video that was about 6 hours long, with a lot of witness evidence, and then when leaders of Bethel had also addressed it, and there was just more transparency, that's when, for me, there was just a little bit of an internal crisis, trying to figure out, okay, what do I do with this? Because even though early on I had sensed, I knew that people could mess up in prophecy, so I thought, well, maybe Shawn missed it, and I shouldn't put too much weight on this. So, going through global schools, supernatural ministry, and other places, I've heard a lot of teaching on prophecy. So I was cautious to not try to build my whole self-conception about myself, my ministry, on that one word. But to be very honest, it did shape a lot of the decisions that I was making in some ways. It was not the final word, but there was a lot of things that I was thinking that kind of I found a sense of leading and divine calling, confirmation through that word. However, it wasn't the only thing. There was, I was going to Ukraine far before this. I had a passion for missions far before this, and I understand that Shawn most likely went on my website, found things like this, and just kind of spoke into that, and kind of spoke in the trajectory of of things I was already doing. But still, there's still a place of finding that the thing that was giving you a sense of confidence and a sense of divine calling, it turns out to be a sham. So what do you do with that? So I processed a lot of it. And
yeah, because I just want to make sure I totally understand. You had told your board that you were sensing maybe you want to do something in Eastern Europe, right?
Right.
But guys, the word that got me here was so, whatever it was, right? The vision, the word that brought me to China was so extreme that that's my assignment until I get something that is also as weighty, whether it's, another vision or dream or whatever, but it has to sit with me. It's got to be weighty. And so that's what you had communicated before going to the Send. You go to the Send, you get this, what we now know to be completely fabricated false word, in the sense of like he had looked you up and he data mined and he just called out all the things about you to spotlight you. And then he spoke generally about what was already on your stuff. So that for you is that word, right? Like you come back to China, you talk to your board, you talk to your leadership, and you're like, guys, this is the word.
Right.
Right? So what was the prophetic protocol or prophetic process that didn't make it just be about that word, or was it just about that word? And now that's part of the turmoil.
Right. So, during those early parts, I had asked my board to pray into it and asked what they were sensing. I had spoken with my leadership, and I told them, I was very open and said, if you see that there's still room for me to be here, I want to follow that. I want to really not get ahead of myself, because I understood that you can get a prophecy, but doesn't mean you have to apply it now. It could be something for a future time. And so, in dialogue, people were sensing that you're not going to make a mistake if you move, and if you have confidence. And for me, just knowing that I had already, since I had served my 2-year commitment, I was already sensing a transition coming in. So I was looking at going to a different part of the country, working in a different region with a specific area of focus. So I was already prepared for transition. And so when this word came and the opportunity came for transition, I interpreted it as no longer transition into a different city or region, but to move to a different country. And so it all kind of lined in that way. And so for me, I had always wanted to build my approach to big decisions like this through prayer and fasting and getting counsel. And I really did that. I remember when I was getting those emails from people questioning the validity of that word, I made an internal decision not to base the things that I was doing off of that word. Even though it encouraged it, I took it back and I said, God, if that's not you, then I don't want it. And I'm so thankful for that I went through that, because at this point it's what's helping me understand that I'm not that my attempts to follow God was not just shaped by one thing. And I know that other people may not have had that story. I'm grateful for the fact that for the experience I had in different schools and ministry schools and mature leadership who were able to speak into that at a certain point. Looking back now, I also see just the fruit of what came in my time in Ukraine. And we were able to pull out over 2,000 people from crisis zones. I mean, even there's a big number of elderly people that we've saved. And I know that if we didn't get them, there's people who wouldn't be alive today. I mean, the weight of that has helped me a lot to just say, yeah, maybe, let's say that maybe I shouldn't have moved to Ukraine, right? But if I take that and I look back at how did God show himself faithful throughout this last, 6 years, I see his story. And that's what encourages me. Knowing that even if someone's a charlatan or could be fake and can kind of try to knock you off your path, I look at the desire to follow God and keeping a pure consciousness before him, to be obedient to him.
Or even what you think is him.
Right.
In the case of a fake word.
Right.
You think it's him.
That's right. And I know one story that really encourages me in that regard, like how do you think it's him, maybe it's not, but you do it as unto the Lord. It helps. Like my grandpa grew up in the Soviet Union. During that time, a lot of the evangelical believers didn't believe that you can take arms because they didn't want to break the commandment, thou shalt not kill. And they were very convinced of that, so much so that there were people who were sent to the gulags and gave their lives as unto the Lord, because they believed that by going to fight for the Communist Party or for the army or the Red Army, it was a sin. And my grandpa served several years in a concentration camp, so to speak. It was a prison. Nowadays, the younger generation of that, the sons and daughters of that generation could look back and like, well, we have a different theology about that. We're not pacifists. And kind of say, well, you didn't really suffer for Christ, because the testimony was, well, we suffer for Christ in this way. That's what they told us as we were growing up, and we took that as them really, as a witness to their love for God. But now looking back, I think, well, even if someone doesn't follow that same line of theology and it's not a pacifist, it doesn't diminish or take away the meaningfulness that they actually did what they did because they believed that it was to have fidelity to God, that they were being obedient to Him, and that act of obedience to the Lord, bringing that as and being willing to suffer for it. I believe they did suffer for Christ, and they were being faithful to Him. And so the same way I look at my story, I interpret it through that lens. I went to Ukraine not because Shawn told me to, and that's what helps me. I thank God that I could say that, and I'm so thankful that He turned all these things together for good. There's a lot of things I don't get, like even what I told you about with the send, falling on the 3 years and COVID. I really don't get it. I understand that there's a lot of false, things that they can creep in. And I'm not willing at this point to say, the prophecy was true, even though he was fake. I'm not going to say that. I just think that God can take things like that and ended up using it for His good. I think that there's definitely some sort of mixture that comes through. I see it in the Bible, and I leave room for that. Like Caiaphas, the high priest, didn't know, but he was prophesying about Jesus' atoning death, even though he was not a believer, not a follower. And so even in the midst of his arrogance and obstinance to the gospel, he still gave a prophetic piece due to his office. And so, again, I'm not building a case, and I'm not trying to defend Shawn in any way. Yeah. But what I am trying to say is that God is bigger than someone's failures, and God is bigger than someone's obstinate heart. And I'm just going to keep trusting Him in that process. And there's a lot of questions that come up to me now, seeing all this. What am I going to do later? How am I going to build ministry? I'm thankful for that there's a storyline of Him being faithful in that. I think still, I don't know, I'm just going back to the drawing board. It's like, hey, Lord, is this how I have to keep doing missions? Is there another way? What would you have me do? And so I'm not, it's not all a cheery story right out the gate. I mean, there's a lot of still internal struggle. I'm thankful for the pastors and the leaders that are messaging me from Ukraine because they heard about some of this. And their messages to me have been really encouraging me. They've been just saying, thank you so much for your ministry to Ukraine. Thanks so much for helping us and what you've done. They've recognized things that the Lord has done through our ministry, and they appreciate that, whatever, regardless of what that word was,
Yeah, and to be fair to Mike Winger on this, he also, I think even in the video, says, like, I'm not saying you're not called to be in Ukraine. You still could be called. You could be doing the Lord's will in Ukraine. That's what I'm saying. It's just you can't hang it all on this word, because it seems like this word and a lot of other ones that he was given were fabricated.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm absolutely confident in the call towards missions. I think just practically speaking, okay, Lord, do you want us to be there 11 months out of the year like we did? What does it look like for us to, in our commitment and so on? Still, I've seen the results also of commitment, because we have lived in Ukraine in that way and have sown in people's lives in a committed way. We have a great team of people. I mean, the fact that I can, leave just for even the time that we've been gone now, and our people are continuing to minister, the ministries are running. I know that doesn't happen through short-term trips. So I'm grateful for that.
What's the ministry looking like now then? Because we talked a little bit about the crisis response. I mean, I don't watch a ton of news, but I don't think the war's over. Or is it? Is it not? Is it? I don't know.
Yeah. No, the war is going on. We're in the western part of the country, so we've done occasional trips now to the eastern front. We've gone to cities like Kherson. Is
there still bombing?
Oh yeah. I mean, I was in one church in one area, Kherson. We came there with a team from the Netherlands. They went down to distribute humanitarian aid and preach, and they asked us to come along with them. So we helped in that with that trip, and we drove into the city. And there's this constant drones. I mean, the drones are chasing civilians sometimes. The pastor's son was telling me that he was riding his bike and there's a drone that's just tailgating him. And it's
Do these drones have weapons on them, or they're just like camera drones?
Yeah, they're suicide drones. They will target people and attack them. Especially in that city, there will be a bomb that flies in somewhere, and people will try to get on the roof and fix the roof, and then they'll send suicide drones to attack. Unfortunately, it's with civilians as well, so it's not just attacking military.
Oh my gosh!
It's devastating. And we were in a church building, from the front to the back. I mean, just full of people. and getting ready to preach. And I remember there's a hunger in people's eyes. And as I'm getting ready to come up, I hear the sounds of bombs going off. Just you can see the smoke in the background, and the building is shaking a little bit. And people are not even flinching. I found out later that this is the second church plant that this church had done. There was a family from Sacramento that had moved. They previously done short-term trips. They began to do long-term trips. They did short-term trips when the war began and Hillsong was occupied. They moved in during the occupation. Were there when the Russian army was there, and they began to minister to people, helping them.
Wow.
And then eventually they were the Russian army was pushed back to the other side of the river, and they continued to be there. Their church was attacked by a huge suicide drone and was blew up. They fixed it. And then they already opened up a second church plant full of people. And they told me that practically everyone that attends their church is a new believer. When I was in a worship service, when they began to sing to the Lord, I thought that I was in a different country. You didn't sense a drop of war, but just beautiful adoration to God. I mean, it was incredible to see. So there's huge hunger in Ukraine. There's a huge need right now. We're focusing right now on raising up this emerging generation of leaders. We're doing schools of discipleship called School Sons and Daughters. We're doing conferences. We're working with other friends to do evangelism schools. We also opened up a coffee shop with a prayer room, and so we do every day we have prayer almost. And then we work with orphan kids, and so there's a lot of room. That's a lot of work that's happening there. So you see that story. I'll share. I think one of the things too that's just worth mentioning. When people were sending me those emails earlier on, I think one of the hardest things for me to kind of navigate through at this point, and I think for a lot of people, is that because some leaders that I really look up to and respect, they had given Shawn an endorsement, and so I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and I was saying, well, I know these leaders. I even met some of them personally, and then so they could stand for him and speak about his character and life. Then I could just rest with that. And so I think that's where a lot of the pain is coming from as well. It's just understanding that this has been going on for a long time. People knew about all of this. And I think that one of the bigger issues at this point is how do we grow in trust at this point? There has to be some. This needs to be addressed more. I think that's why I'm really thankful to be here and talk about this, because I want to be as transparent as possible with my story. I know that not everyone could maybe have gone through that same process that I did, and so their lives are have experienced a real trauma, real pain that it'll take time, especially as it relates to prophecy and the prophetic. I know for me, I've seen your dad in Brazil in a church that we've never been in. I was doing your dad's emails, so I know he didn't know this person's information. Stand up and just say, hey, do you have pain in this, in your body? Is it over there? And he just more and more, and it was getting more and more specific. And then praise and asked the person to test it out, and they were healed right in front of everybody. So I've seen real words of knowledge. I've seen in my life. I was in a church and I said, hey, there's somebody here who has had head trauma and you have pain. And I think it was like the left ear, and you lost sense of hearing, very specific. And without even praying for her, she was healed completely. So I've seen the real.
Wow.
And so knowing that God does this, I don't want to, in the middle of the pain, to reject it. I think that one person's errors or a group of people's errors doesn't nullify the real, authentic move of God and the things He does. And I don't want to become less vigorous in my pursuit of it. How do we platform people? How do we give people room to exercise their gifts? Well, I think, and I've listened to your previous video message, and I think it's the important thing is to never prioritize the gifting, the anointing over character. That takes time of formation. I think in today's social media generation, it's easy to think that if somebody has a large social media following, that gives them maturity. That's not synonymous. A big following, it does not give someone a position of leadership, and I think that needs to be also distinguished. Somebody could be a great speaker, it doesn't speak for their maturity. In our Old Testament course right now in GATS, Dr. Boda he's going through just how to identify authentic prophecy or authentic prophets. And his paradigm was very helpful. There's 3 ways. One was the means of revelation. The other one was the messenger, and then the message. And if any one of these are polluted, then it disqualifies a person from being a prophet. You could have you can have even the right message, like in my case, right? It was a great message, but the means by which they tried to attain information is wrong, so it nullifies. And then you have, the messengers themselves. What is, not just how great of a speaker they are, but what is their relationship to the body of Christ? How do they treat people? Do they stand in an intercessory place? Is there real brokenness for the people, that they're not just coming from God to bring them a word, but are actually taking the sin or the brokenness or whatever it is, that the struggle of the people, the needs of the people, and bringing it up to God, and that's been a template of Old Testament prophets, and that carries on in the New. You don't just have people giving, distributing words just like that. There has to be in a prophetic office in the body of Christ is something that speaks of a person's compassion. There's a shepherding aspect to it. So I pray that gets recovered. Yeah.
Amen. That's awesome. I'm remembering now fondly my time in Boda's Old Testament course. Okay, will you talk a little bit about the hardest thing? Right? I want to sort of drill down on that, which is the ways in which, even at a certain time, before it was now public, right? Mm-hmm. There was people who were, hey man, I don't know, like, have you seen this? Maybe they were sending you evidence, maybe they weren't. I don't know. Or they're just saying like, hey man, I'd be careful, But you had that, which you weren't sticking your head in the sand. Mm-hmm. You actually were saying, okay, I hear this, I see this, but here are these guys that I know and I trust and I love. I feel like I've walked with some of them. You have walked with some of them personally. I've met them, and they're endorsing him. Right? Like, so given between the stranger from the internet who sent an email, as compelling as it might have been, and the fathers and friends of the movement and the faith that I'm a part of, I'm going to lean into here because I've not been put on notice.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's the hardest part, right? Because that's the broken trust now, right?
Yeah.
How did you, take me through that process?
Yeah.
What did it look like? Was it a week, 2 weeks? Was it just like one moment in a prayer closet and then God spoke to you and you're good? Because
Yeah. That's a good question. I think I'm still recovering in some ways.
We're still in process.
Yeah.
Praise God.
Yeah. There's a process for sure. I think.
What have been your stages?
Yeah, I think just because I've been around this movement, I've been around leaders, that I know that there was not some conniving, there wasn't some bad motivation here. I think that there's genuine desire to try to, maybe, from what I heard, they were trying to help Shawn, and now it becomes evident that's not the right way to go about it, because you're then hurting everybody else.
That's the big takeaway. One of the big takeaways. There's many big takeaways. Is that we've been too focused on the elite or the minister, and not focused enough, or at all sometimes, mm-hmm. on those that are victimized or those that are potentially harmed. And it needs to be flipped. Yes, Jesus restores Peter, and he tells him, "Take care of my sheep."
Yeah.
Right? That's the mandate. So great. For restoration, we have hearts of compassion and grace, but it's always got to be focused on the body.
Right. And I think there's just I think people have tried to emphasize restoration into ministry, and I'm just not sure that's always has to be the goal. I think people have to really fight for the people who are in the receiving end of ministry. At the end of the day, we're not saved to become ministers in an organized way, to have a position in an organization or so on.
Be restored to the body of Christ.
Right.
Be reconciled with Christ.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I think the default should be, hey, we're not restoring you unto ministry. We're restoring you unto your family. We're restoring you unto the Lord.
Right.
And let's just take that off the table, and then we'll just see. Let's just see. But right now, you've severed relationship. You've created, for Bethel terminology, you've created messes. We'll clean those up. But we should not be. No one should be focused on that. Mm-hmm. Right. That should not be anyone's main. The pursuit of this endeavor of restoration is to return you to a stage. I think
the depth of deception is also probably something that people might not understand yet. And I could share from my story.
What does that mean? Yeah.
Well, after the send, I had a few people message me saying, "Hey, Shawn wants to reach out to you." So
Shawn Bolz?
Shawn Bolz. He wanted to get in touch with me. So he posted this on Instagram saying, "Hey, does anybody know where Dennis is?" And then I had a popular minister's daughter reach out to me, say, "Hey, Shawn's trying to get in touch with you." So I had a phone call with him. And in this phone call, he's just very lighthearted and talking with me, and then gives me a story about how he got this revelation. So he shares how he was in his hotel room, and then Francis Chan was speaking on the live translation, the live feed during the send, and how he gets into this vision and how he sees me. And he describes this whole story of how he received revelation, and then gave me some counseling pieces on how to go about it. So hearing that from him, I was also convinced of his character and wow, this big minister he gave a word and he's also willing to follow up on it and talk to me about it. So, hindsight, looking back, there was a lot of it was premeditated.
What was he doing in that moment, do you think? Like, as best as you can tell, obviously it's hard to know because it's in another man's head, but like, this is either really sick, it sounds sick, or like, what is happening here? Like, because this is after he's given the word.
Yeah.
So like, I don't even know if this is a normal thing that he does. Does he follow back up? But after that, he finds you in some way and he wants to unpack it for you and then give you some.
I can look at this. I'm disposed to look at it maybe optimistically in some ways, but I'm sure there's people could add their perspective. I think that perhaps he knew, because he knew what he was doing, how it could weigh on people. Perhaps because the counsel he was giving me was, you don't have to do anything to make it happen. The Lord will make it happen. But I was 23 or something years old. 24. I was like, this is confirmation. I want to talk to the Lord about it. But I really sense that the Lord is wanting to do something, especially when you're that age, when you're eager to hear from God. You're looking for your identity. You're looking for God's direction in your life. Sure. You're asking the Lord, and He's come. So it definitely, it prompted decisions. And so I think that maybe he was trying to lighten the impact of what he was doing.
Maybe he's like, I went a little too far with that one. I'm going to be sending it and so I'm going to maybe try and
perhaps
put the toothpaste back in the tube with this one.
Perhaps,
Interesting.
Yeah. And so knowing how he came off to me and how he was taking that approach, I don't know, but I can at least have at least some sort of imagination to consider what he was saying to confrontations that were coming from different leaders like Rizvalton, as he mentioned, or Cheon, people who were reaching out to him. That's what, so there's a lot of deception that stood behind it. And so I say that in hopes to give a little bit of a broader picture to people who are seeing this play out right now as it's happening on the internet and different conversations. How trying to address things like this when somebody is really trying hard to cover their tracks, how difficult it could be. That is not to excuse, but it's at least to maybe put out an alert to say it's not so clean cut. He's probably doing a good job to try to convince people that all these accusations are false. That's a good takeaway.
Well, I can't even imagine. This is my first time I'm hearing this. I don't know if you shared it publicly before, but I'm like, wait a second. He reached out to you and called you. And so now I'm putting myself in your shoes where it's like, even if someone does send me some stuff that maybe even looks really credible, I know not only the word and the timing of that and having just said what I said to the board and then getting this, then he calls me and sort of like tries to pastor me in a situation. Like, now I'm going back to, it feels like he's likely covering up. I don't want to be too judgmental, but that's what it seems like.
Yeah.
It does seem very sick, does seem very dangerous. But if I'm thinking of you, it's like, now I'm definitely, not only are my leaders telling me this guy's okay, he seemed like a good dude. He reached out to me when he didn't have to. He called out other people, I'm sure, right? He gave other words. And wow.
Yeah.
So no way are you discounting that word then until this really is like 100%, because you have, there's a lot of history, a lot of real lived experience with this word and this man that, wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, we had a second call.
What?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. We had
before you moved to Ukraine.
This is after when the war began. Somehow messaging him, and I was just trying to
So this is in 2022. Then.
This is 22 or 23. I got to double check.
So you're still contending for this word in 22, 23.
22. This is during the war, and I messaged him just to try to. Well, this is when I found out about the 3-year. When the alignment of the word with the 3 years, how it fell on that date, and I'm just trying to message him and say, hey, did you notice that? And he calls me, and he connects me with a channel on TBN, and he tries to prop me up a little bit with, I don't know what he was trying to do, but maybe he was trying to also, now that I moved to Ukraine, trying to help me out a little bit. However, so it was very involved in that process, which for me, looking at this now, shows the level of depravity that was there in that deception.
Yeah.
It's just unfortunate and painful to see how this was covered up. He tried hard to cover it up, and so I really feel for people that I know personally, or also on the receiving end of Shawn's prophetic words. I know not everybody had that sense of maybe, or that process of sorting through all of it. But I'm in a place right now where I just trust that God is bigger than this, and that lets me really rest. If I'm in a place personally, and I know not everyone is, that I can at least say, because I've seen His faithfulness, if I would choose to go through to Ukraine, knowing what came out of it, I would choose it again. Not everybody would be able to say that, and that's why we have to be exceptionally careful about allowing people to have that kind of platform, or being quick to address things like this, because it could lead down a very steep slope. So yeah.
I didn't know any of this, so I'm just like, this is wild to me. I have so many questions, but I don't know that they're all appropriate for consumption. I'm just like, oh my gosh, that is awful. Wow, bro, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
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 That's tough. So, okay, help us then. Help those that can't say what you say, meaning I got a word, and, a lot of the critiques are, which I think are fair, is like, man, he's hyper specific when he's calling out the stuff, and then he's just super watery generic when it's like the prophetic word.
Right.
So but you wasn't so. It was like, oh man, you're going to end up relocating to another country. Certainly, he's given other words to people. I saw some people are getting married. People are, like the whole thing. We know some ourselves. So, what would you say to them when, like, hey, this isn't my story. Mm-hmm. Like I did come with a pure heart. I did think it was the Lord, and I entered into it, but it didn't end well.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be if you were at the front lines in the war and you lose, an arm because it's like, wait a second, and then you don't meet Anya, you don't get married. It's like you don't have the good fruit to look back on. How do you navigate this season so that you can, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus and not just throw out the bad stuff and the good, you know what I mean? Because clearly God's burning up and clearing out the bad stuff.
Right.
But if we want to hold fast to the good.
Say at the end of the day, we're gonna stand before God, and He's the one who gives us life. He's the one who calls us and does things through our life. So I would encourage anybody, regardless of whatever, even if it's whether from Shawn or anybody else, if you have a word, you're ultimately living unto God, and even if you had a word from Shawn and you were in the receiving end of all this, then God is a defender of His children, and I thoroughly believe that if anyone is struggling through right now, their story is not being thrown out and becoming invalid, because at the end of the day, their story becomes how they lived through the deception, how they responded in it, and what the testimony of Christ is in them. I think one of the most helpful advice that I've ever received in my life is that God's purpose in you is to form the image of Christ in you. So even if we lose everything that we have in our ministry, if everything goes wrong, I shared a great story, what all the good things that took place, but everything goes wrong, I want to always look for that. How am I honoring Him in that process? Having that perspective helps me, and it will help any one of us to really overcome this, because people they will fail, and what's taking place now is not unique to human history. It's painful and it's sharp. It is right now. Human nature is not gonna stop until Christ comes, and so I want I want anyone, including myself, to look for what is the testimony of Christ in the middle of the mess that they're going through. And if I choose right now, even as I go back to Ukraine, to be faithful where He's to Him, not just our calling, to how I understand it to be, but being faithful to Him. That's what's going to allow me to have peace. And I that's where I really think that all the talk that we have about God's calling in our life and how His the prophetic destiny and so on, I always think that's secondary, because we're always hearing in part. We're always trying to follow Him. That we're willing to make mistakes. And if my heart just remains open to the Lord, it's like an open sail. The wind of God can come through and redirect it. And I never think that the enemy's ability to deceive us is greater than God's ability to keep us. And that remains my confidence, that God is not enabled to come into all of it and redirect and use that, or even better, allow you to see how He's not, His work is not somehow diminished by what took place. And that's helpful to me as well. Even if somebody doesn't have the same results, like maybe what we've seen, I still think that the faithfulness to God is of insurmountable value. That helps me. What would I do if I get put in a prison cell while going to a closed nation? If I get persecuted for my faith, I could complain that my ministry ended abruptly, or I can thank God that I have the opportunity to suffer for Christ in that context, right, in that way. So that helps me see that, to know that my suffering is not something that is a distraction from my calling, and it doesn't also justify it in any way. I don't think this is where we get into the theology of suffering, and sometimes we think of that just suffering for our testimony to Christ. But I think suffering for Jesus is also suffering for righteousness, suffering to maintain a pure conscience in the middle of all of it. That's the kind of suffering that's more difficult to do, because it's easy to, not easy, but it's usually more upfront to us, this realization of what suffering looks like when it relates to an external type of ministry. But when it comes down to my fidelity and my drawing near to Christ in the middle while everything is crashing around me, I think that's of insurmountable value, and that's what I want to stay in.
So I appreciate in there you're saying, because you recognize we prophesy in part. We don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't see in part, prophesy in part, and you haven't turned aside from prophecy because you've seen the real, you've seen the genuine.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you've experienced negatively the fake, but you've seen the genuine. So help us navigate. What do we do? Like, if we even are still here, just humbly saying, Lord, I still believe you speak. I still believe that you communicated Holy Spirit with Paul to write that we all should prophesy. Mm-hmm. Right? That love is the foundation, yes. Speaking in tongues edifies us individually, yes, but man, I want you all to be able to prophesy. So I know it's a thing. I can't throw it out. I'm not excising it from the Bible, but I want to know how to handle it, because it seems right now unsafe. It seems dangerous. It seems, I don't know. What would you say how do you steward, how do you receive a prophetic word, like personally? Like, how do you receive a prophetic word? What do you do with it? What are the ways in which you keep it safe and make it ultimately, be what it's been to you, which has been such a source of encouragement and comfort and help?
Well, prophecy in general has been something that I've really held as valuable in our life because of the way that Christ offers us the new covenant. We're supposed to live by the Spirit. We should live by the Spirit. There's a whole. If you just get into like new covenant passages, we talk about how God will give us a new heart and give sensitivity to Him. Jesus talks about hearing His voice, and so that still is a big part of everything. So even if somebody gives you an external word, I always want to bring it up before the Lord and say, okay, God, I heard it from Him, but I need you to also give me a witness. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word will be established. And so keeping those protocols in place by just knowing that one word does not supersede or override previous things that I felt the Lord speaking to me. And I think for just the continuation factor is really important. Does it coincide with what you felt God speaking to you previously? And I think it's especially important to fast and pray, both of those elements, especially if it concerns some drastic life decisions. You look at Saul and David. One of the biggest differentiations between them both as kings is that Saul is a model of one who was called by God, anointed, had a divine call in his life, but eventually took matters into his own hand instead of seeking divine counsel. Whereas David, a model, is one who was able to do things that seemed completely out of his bounds, but he was led by the Lord and ended up doing things that didn't make sense. Like bringing the tabernacle in and into and being there in these places that were reserved for priests. And so what I see in that story, that's been a vital kind of touching point for my life, is just saying, I want to make sure that I'm not at the end of the day just relying on my own interpretation. I want to have the mouth of two or three witnesses. I also want to have people who know me from a leadership position to kind of speak into it. I'm not saying that you subjugate yourself fully to another person's will, but I want to hear what they think of that. I know that if I bring something up to people that I trust and they think, well, I'm not sure about that, then I will pray double about it. I will really take extra thought into it. So I think those things have helped me, to understand that if somebody also who prophesies to me doesn't live a life that shows love for God or a real commitment to Jesus in moral things, then I also will take that word more lightly, just knowing that it could be polluted. Doesn't make everybody a false prophet if they make a mistake, but it does mean that I greatly diminish or put on if I see someone is not doing what they speak, then that word goes on the shelf. So I think character plays also into credibility. I think that's something that's maybe not been talked about as much, but I think it has to be, because where a person's heart is becomes the place, the source out of where their words come from. So I think those elements are really important. Those three ones. Just does it have agreement with what you felt the Lord speak to you before? Does it? Do you have confirmation on a personal level, but also with people around in your life to find counsel to speak into you? The Proverbs talks about how with many counselors one's plans succeeds. So I would highly encourage people to avoid this kind of almost like a maverick posture where I got this word, I'm going to do it regardless of what people say because I want to be true to the Lord. I really highly caution that.
I don't know if it's only an American posture, but we have been talking about that. It's certainly like a rugged individualist where it's like, the great news is Holy Spirit lives inside. He's found his temple finally, and like that he always wanted, and you can communicate. You can hear it. He speaks to us.
Right.
That's amazing.
Right.
But it's meant to be within a family, a body.
Yes.
Right. And so what we've done in America, at least the West, is we've, I think, elevated our ability now that we can hear to say like, okay, God, you speak to me, and now you've spoken to me, so I'm going, instead of submitting it to the body.
Right.
Not necessarily to those who are going to lord it over you, but those who actually love you, who know you, who can also pray. Like that's why I think it's the most important thing is like, are you, when people tell me I've heard the Lord speak, he told me to do this, I was like, fantastic. What has he told you about this person's? Like, do you only hear God for yourself, or are you just receiving and like you're actually ready to give the word of life to someone in this community? Otherwise, then we just need to wait and
right.
let's do it together. Not to be domineering or manipulative, but like we have to have like there's the safety in that. If you're in a place that's safe, that people who love you, that know you, that you're walking together with, that is a great safeguard, because
yes.
you can hear something and think like, I feel so strongly about that, especially if you're 23. Just like, this is what I'm going to do. I feel like God's called me to do it. I have a desire for significance. This is it. Mm-hmm. And they'd be like, I think God's on this, but not right now.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Let's just wait.
Yeah, I think, being conscious of your ability to err is a healthy place to be, not to get into this overconfidence in your sense of interpretation, because you can have a revelation that's really from God, but in the process of interpreting that word and then applying it correctly is a whole process that takes wisdom. It takes guidance, and the Lord gives wisdom, but He also speaks to the mouths of people around you. And I would also mention even what I was saying previously about making sure that someone's character aligns with their gifting. this is like troubled waters in a sense, because you can have people who really do have a gift and so on. But I think this is where we really have to make sure that what we are taking in is in alignment with the revelation we have in Scripture. Scripture becomes the foundation of it all, And so I think if in the process you realize, hey, there's something here that I'm not sure about, it's okay to wait. It's okay to put things on a shelf. You're not going to miss God. If God really wants you to follow through it, He can give repetition. How He did to Joseph with the bread baker and the cupbearer. He gave repeating dreams. And I think that place of just trusting that God is able to clarify His word, He's able to provide discernment, trusting in Him and not getting ahead of yourself. Sometimes we feel this pressure of time to do things, and that God is way above that. He's a good shepherd, and He promises that we will hear His voice. And so, one of my friends once said, His name is the Word. He loves to speak. So we can have that confidence that He's saying that He does speak. And I love what you're saying. It takes a body to hear appropriately, or to hear fully, because we hear in part. So one part hears one side, one part hears another side, and it's this beautiful picture of humility, where I can understand, like, I have an ability to hear an aspect. I also have the ability to err, but also I have a good shepherd who's able to lead me into truth, and his ability to lead me to truth supersedes the enemy's ability to deceive me, and I trust in that aspect. I trust in the ability that if I keep a pure heart, as I spoke about this earlier, that if my heart's pure, it's an open sail to the wind of the Spirit. I don't have to be afraid of making mistakes, as long as I know that I'm following the Lord in this. And that itself is a recipe to really be led by the Spirit, because that's what we're called to do. Being led by the Spirit is a huge part of our life in Christ. And so as we're facing this problem right now with finding, how do you discern the authentic? It's good to start off on the basis that there is authenticity. There is an authentic expression of the prophetic. And so that's the basis that I like to approach the question, and then we discern it together.
That's awesome. I mean, that's beautiful. Hey, well, listen, we did a video a while ago with Elijah Stevens. I know is a mutual friend of ours.
Yeah.
Where we basically had to say, like, hey, we had suspicions. At least I had suspicions in 2018 with regards to some of the ways in which the numbers didn't seem to add up. It seemed very probable in my mind, and no one else was confirming it, so I just put it on the back, but I said, it's not worth it. Let's not have Shawn. I don't remember when I heard about you receiving the word, if it was 2020, if you'd already gone, but I do need to apologize to you and repent as well, because my inability to actually put something out there to let people know prevented you from being able to also say, wait a second, is this the word? It should have been a check to at least allow you to say, hey, this feels good, and this is in line with the lunch stuff, but there's this thing out here. And this person that I really respect, Randy and Global, they have a check. Maybe we don't know the details yet. We probably didn't in 2019 at all. But they're at least giving me a word of caution. Mm-hmm. And we should have done that. I should have done that. And I'm sorry.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, man.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I forgive you, and I really appreciate that. And just, when this whole thing went down, when Mike Winyard dropped the video, I was wondering, saying we're gonna reach out. And I remember Mike Van Hol, he texted me. You have no idea. Like, it seems little, but for me, I was kind of, just to be very honest, I was in a place I was wondering, are they gonna reach out? Am I gonna hear anything? And then when he gave me that text, it spoke to me. I was like, wow, that I feel cared for. I feel heard. I feel that just when you go through something like this, the being seen helps you process through, because it makes it possible for you to kind of at least have a footing to understand, like, okay, people actually care about this process. I'm not on my own, and then so even being here with you right now, it's a real sign of willingness and a desire to work through this. Thank you, Josh. I love you guys, and I forgive you guys. Well, if anybody's, if there's anything, like, I don't hold any kind of grudges. I mean, that's, if anything, I actually have a lot of appreciation for the approach and attitude that I've received, and I hope that others would also be able to find that.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
Yeah.
I love you so much.
Love you too, man.